Good afternoon, friends. My name is Joan Arne Halperin. I am a grateful daughter of Sousa Mendes visa recipients and a member of the Sousa Mendes Education Committee. Olivia Mattis, president of the organization, has entrusted me with this program today. Olivia, I hope I do a good job for you. Okay, first I'd like to introduce our special guests. Blanche Wiesen-Cook is one of the experts that you met in today's film. She's a distinguished professor of history and women's studies at John Jay College and the Graduate Center of the City University of New York. She's also the author of the award-winning definitive 3-volume biography of Eleanor Roosevelt. You won't want to miss what Blanche has to say today. Rebecca Eichler is an immigration attorney and refugee advocate. She lives and works in Mexico, and she advises deportees, migrants, and asylum seekers at the US border. In the fall of 2018, she spearheaded Central Mexico's legal aid response to the migrant caravans, providing consultations and Know Your Rights presentations. She's a modern day hero. And last but not least, Laura SELTZER-DUNY. She's the producer and director of today's film, Nobody Wants Us. What a film, and what a title. Her award-winning films have been aired on many of your favorite PBS stations and also commercial stations. She's the founder of Seltzer Film and Video, and she founded her company to give voice to individuals or issues that often go unnoticed. And she's also a member of the Sousa Mendes Education Committee. Laura, how are you?
I'm good, Joan. I'm so happy to be here today.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you so much. Well, for those who haven't had a chance to watch Nobody Wants Us yet, can you give us a brief summary of your film?
Absolutely, I would love to. Okay, so the brief summary for those who have not watched it, and you'll be able to watch it through till Monday night if you haven't yet. It's about some of the last refugees that were allowed into the United States until the end of the war, in World War II. And it's about how these refugees narrowly escaped war-torn Europe, and they were hoping to find a safe place to live in the United States. And the story's told through the voices of 3 teenagers.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I've seen the film, of course, and I know that it's fabulous. But anyway, Laura, I have another question for you. You have a previous film. It's called The Last Boat Out. It's also an award-winning PBS film. And that film drives viewers to take action to save the Chesapeake Bay, which is very close to your home, and probably close to your heart if you made a film about it. Now, what kind of a reaction do you hope Nobody Wants Us will create in your audience?
So my goal as an impact producer is not just to make a film, but to actually affect change. So whether it's to inspire action or raise awareness or literally help change public policy, that's what I'm hoping that my products will do, my films will do, my educational programs will do, which is what we're creating now, is actually a program, the Nobody Wants Us program for schools. So I'm thrilled that the film is airing nationally on PBS. That's exciting. But what I'm really passionate about is getting the film out to educators and community leaders to show the film, plus use the educational modules and the dialogues like this. This is part of our educational program to not only create a better empathy for refugees, to put yourself in their shoes, but also to inspire action today.
Okay, fantastic.
So oh yes, I'm sorry.
So Laura, you're going to take the program from here. Thank you.
Sure thing. So, okay, so first up, what I want to do is show you guys a short excerpt from the film. And it's about the refugees that are now held on the ship. They're in the port in Hampton Roads, Virginia. They're hoping they're not going to get sent back. And then after we watch this clip, I'm very much looking forward to talking with Blanche Wiesen-Cook about really Eleanor Roosevelt's, what kind of influence she had at the time until the end of the war. So Matt, if you can screen share, he's going to show just about a minute and a half, the first minute of this. This is part of our modules. On the next clip, you'll see the modules before you see the clip, but take it away, Matt.
It was a very dramatic time because in 24 hours, they were going to go back to Lisbon and face the Nazi regime and face the bombs. I can tell you what happened on board the Quanza that illustrates the concern that the refugees had. They were afraid of going back and dying. One passenger, Hillman Wolf, jumped ship, and he was picked up by the military police and returned to the ship. The captain was so concerned that the passengers would start jumping ship that he had armed guards on the deck of the Quanza.
My father was able to board the ship in New York, but now that we're in Virginia, he's not allowed to anymore.
Looking through the porthole was my sister, my mother, and I. And my father was on the dock, and he was reaching with his hand up to us. And the journalist took this photograph.
I feel like we're never getting off this ship. I just want to be back on land. A local newspaper reporter interviewed us. Maybe this will help.
My sister was in despair. We had already been sent back from Veracruz, and she was sure the same thing was going to happen here. The headline was, "Are you going to send these people back to the camps of Germany?" Everybody was in great despair there on that ship.
These refugees were running for their lives against mass roundups into faraway camps that were established as early as 1933.
And at that time, Eleanor Roosevelt was trying to convince the State Department, Breckinridge Long, and her husband, FDR, to allow the refugees to disembark in Norfolk.
My family came here a very long time ago. Someday everyone will realize we are connected. Everything that happens anywhere ultimately affects everyone everywhere.
Mrs. Roosevelt called me up and expressed her interest in the children. I'm consistently declining to deviate from the procedure which we had adopted. The fact that these people are on the boat does not constitute an emergency of any kind.
Last year, the St. Louis, with hundreds of refugees, was turned away and sent back to Europe. I can't let this happen to these people, too.
Yeah, it's kind of scary, the foreshadowing of what happened, years later in Auschwitz. So Blanche, I would love for you to share with us your thoughts on Eleanor Roosevelt's involvement at the time, and how much influence did she have then during that incident until the end of the war?
First of all, Laura, thank you so much for this incredibly important film and all of your work. Eleanor Roosevelt, when the SS St. Louis was returned and other ships were returned, he vowed that it should never happen again. And in September 19 there were people who contacted her on the 10th of September. She was contacted about the Quanza, and she got in touch with her friends, Patrick Malin, who had been active with the ACLU and was on the President's Advisory Committee on Political Refugees. And she got in touch with other people who went down there and listened to her and really said, okay, no, they're not going to go back. And Eleanor Roosevelt said, they can stay as my guests. And the team that she called for into action did what Breckinridge Long, who was really a fascist, Eleanor Roosevelt actually said to FDR, but Franklin, you know, he's a fascist. And he was. He didn't want any refugees. He said they're all either communists or fascists themselves. And he really, none is too many, which was the Canadian word. And it was very bitter. And when the Quanza people were allowed to stay after that, Breckinridge Long freaked out. And he said to FDR, who's in charge here, me or your wife? And FDR said, you, to Breckinridge Long. And he gave him complete power, which lasted until 1944. And the very bitter years in between, there's the Varian Fry Rescue Committee, the Emergency Rescue Committee that is put together. And I deal with the Varian Fry efforts, and that was sabotaged as well. But it's not until Henry Morgenthau on the 13th of January, 1944, with his team, and I'd like to read, if I can get to the page, Henry Morgenthau's really incredible indictment of the Roosevelt administration until January 1944. It's called the Report to the Secretary on the Acquiescence of this Government in the Murder of the Jews. And it is an incredible statement, one of the greatest crimes in history. The slaughter of the Jewish people in Europe is continuing unabated. And it involved not only a willful failure, but acts to prevent the rescue of the Jews. Needless restrictions, subterfuges, bold mendacity. And it's a report that specifically names Breckinridge Long as guilty. And the US, by its own 1924 Immigration Act, US could have admitted 150,000 immigrants annually, but only admitted in all of those years 4,750. And these were all different ways of getting in. And this report really stunned the press. It really was used to create the War Refugee Board. And over time, as a result of the War Refugee Board, Ruth Gruber goes to Europe very late in June 1944 and brings over one ship, and that one ship goes to the one haven that the US creates in Oswego. And it's a really bitter, bitter story of, cooperate.
I mean, it's hard to think about. There was so much difficulty at that time, in that time period, but there were those heroes like the Ruth Grubers, right?
Yes.
Like the Patrick Murphy Malins, like you mentioned, like the Eleanor Roosevelts, when she could make change happen. And I think that's something that we all need to remember, that, even though it seems like it's an insurmountable, right? Insurmountable odds, we still need to not be bystanders, right?
Right, absolutely. And she did what she could. She fought every day with FDR. You know, when she heard about Varian Fry and she heard about the various camps that people were living in, her friends in the American Friends Service Committee would send her reports. And she would write about these reports in her daily column. She would write articles about what was happening in Europe. And really, she was the one who lifted the veil of silence that was going on. And she fought with FDR every day. Isn't there something we can do? Can't we get some more people saved? And she really did that with her team, the American Friends Service Committee, the people around Patrick Murphy Malin, the ACLU. There was a group, there were groups, and there was an effort, but it was bitter time.
Absolutely. I also want to just tell you guys, I love this book. I love Blanche. It's a second in your third 3 parts. Really good information. This is the third or
the third.
Oh, this is the third of 3. So Amazon.com.
I wanted to just jump in and talk about how, you know, the dichotomy between the former First Lady who, Melania Trump, when she finally showed up at the migrant camps wearing a jacket that says, "I don't really care, do you?" And what effect that has, you know, and that sets the tone of the administration. And at least, you know, Eleanor was doing something as opposed to what the last administration was doing. And it's such a contrast to how that, you know, the influence that one person can have when you have the ear of the executive to do that. And I think, you know, this is not political in it at all. This is historical, and this is what happened. So, you know, drawing the parallels of facts that happened, you know, here in this country and, you know, 50 years, 70 years ago is important to recognize.
Absolutely. And
I guess the one thing I would add is that Eleanor Roosevelt visited Oswego with Eleanor Morgenthau, and she was horrified because the refugees that had been brought over on Ruth Cooper's ship, the Henry Gibbons, they were behind barbed wire, and they had relatives. Many of them had relatives in New York, and they weren't allowed to leave. They were imprisoned. And Eleanor Roosevelt fought against that. And one of the most wonderful things she did was that she made an arrangement with various colleges to get the children, the young people, into schools and colleges and universities, free tuition without pay. And she really made, you know, she really created an alternative life to this terrible prison that was Oswego.
You know, it just made me think about also the same time period, internment camps, Japanese internment camps. A whole nother dialogue we could take. That's the thing. There's so many things we could talk about, but to Rebecca's point about the parallels then and now, I'd like to show a clip now. This is going to be a 1.5-minute clip. It's about discrimination in Europe and discrimination in the US. And then afterwards, I'd love to talk to you, Rebecca, as an immigration attorney about the advocates then and the advocates now.
My husband was thoroughly exhausted when it was all over, both mentally and physically. But we kept up our spirits, and in the end, the people finally were allowed to get off the ship. I just hope they can find comfort in our country after leaving everything behind.
I'm so glad to be in the United States. But I saw something strange today that I just don't understand.
She saw separate bathrooms for black people and for white people and separate drinking fountains. She was shocked. She realized it was discrimination, and then we had just gotten away from that kind of discrimination. It made a deep impression on her because she never forgot it.
I hope the teachers and kids treat me better than they treated me in Belgium. My dad says that we'll like New York and that we'll be safe there,
I hope he's right.
They were all so eager to get to their families in New York, so we rented them a bus. I'll never forget that moment. I can see their happy, smiling faces waving American flags as they waved goodbye and that bus pulled away. We all just wept.
I love that clip so much because, you know, those were the heroes on the front lines in 1940. They were just like us, you know, the National Council of Jewish Women who were local, and they stood up, and the woman who wept when they got them on that bus. Oh, I love it. And the lawyers, right? The lawyers were heroes. Rebecca is our modern day hero. So Rebecca, you're a lawyer, you're a refugee advocate, you're working with people like the National Council of Jewish Women back then, today. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about some of the parallels that you've seen in the film and what's going on now?
Yeah, actually, I am also wanted to thank you for including me on this conversation, and the timing couldn't be better to draw the parallels, because literally in the last 3 days, the US government has begun allowing the entry of the asylum seekers who have been gathered on the southern border with the US and Mexico. And they have been they've been forced to wait for the last 2 years, and they're now finally able to enter. And just like in this movie, people who have been seeking protection, who have been turned away and refused, are now finally coming in. And Matt, if you want to show the clip of this is happening right now. Thank you. And I want to make the point that these people are asylum seekers. They have fled incredibly dangerous circumstances. I was actually at the Brownsville bus station a year ago, just shortly before COVID. And the consultations that I had with people were horrific in the violence. One woman pulled out her file, and the very first thing was a picture of 2 severed heads it was the violence that she was fleeing. I heard stories of children being kidnapped, women being gang raped. They are 100% fleeing violent, dangerous circumstances, and they come to the United States seeking safety and seeking security. And they, have been blocked from entering the United States for the last 2 years, just like the refugees from Europe were trying to seek safety in the United States. So, just these parallels, and it's heartening to me that after so many years of people fighting for the release, fighting for these people's human rights, which I wanted to just mention the whole current US human rights system, the immigration system, the asylum system, was created in the aftermath of World War II to make sure that this wouldn't happen again, that the idea of this genocide and these horrible things that the government was inflicting on people, we wanted to not have that happen again. And so this is what the US asylum system is based on. And to see the parallels right now, certainly there aren't this exact same parallels of concentration camps and asylum seekers at a border, but the risks are real in both cases. And there's a question here about where to send donations. I think that there are, right now at the border, there are organizations helping. And I think Matt's gonna put some in the chat box, but specifically, I know HIAS is involved in different aspects. There's an organization called Lawyers for Good Government, who provides legal assistance at the border. There's a group called the Sidewalk School for Asylum Seekers that had previously been providing school for children who are stuck in the camps, who have not been able to go to school for 2 years. And they have teachers from among the asylum seekers, educators, who have been teaching children elementary school lessons. And now that they're being allowed to go into the United States, it's kind of their focus has changed, and they're providing sponsors for asylum seekers, because if you don't have a sponsor, if you don't have a family to go to, people are being detained, hopefully very briefly, but they're being put into detention centers until they can leave. So if anybody wants to step up in this huge way, I really am looking at the video and the clip, and these people got on the bus to go to New York where their family is, and now today in Brownsville, people are coming into the bus station and they're dispersing. They're going to LA, Tennessee, to New York, all sorts of places, and they need funds to travel. They need a sponsor to welcome them. Being a sponsor is a huge responsibility, and it's important. And I know that people on the Quanza had sponsors. They had people who to welcome them. My grandparents came on a ship. My father came to the United States following World War II on a ship, and they had sponsors. And having somebody to ease the way to get to where your destination is it was important then, and it's so important now. So there's organizations that are definitely helping, and we post those in the chat. And I think the biggest thing to say is that people can help. Anything you can do, if you have skills, if you have language skills, if you have legal skills, if you have a home to offer, if you have $10 to buy a backpack so somebody doesn't have to get on a bus with a garbage bag of their belongings, every single thing is helpful.
Absolutely. And I think what I love about you, Rebecca, and I love about this story, and I just want to make this clear to everybody, is that the parallels are about the heroes that can help, and it's also about the America's response to refugees. So it's not about like what those refugees went through, to what one group of refugees went through to what another. It's about we welcome the refugee. We were refugees too. And that is, to me, what I love about the takeaway is that we can all make a difference. So thank you, Rebecca, for your great work. I'm going to show one more clip, unless you had any more. Did you have any other thoughts, Rebecca, to share? Okay. I am going to show one more clip before our Q&A and some announcements. And this will be about almost 2 minutes long. And it's part of this is the 13th module in our educational program, but it is an excerpt of the film that many of you have already seen or will see before Monday night.
The Quanza had a bittersweet ending because of Breckinridge Law. He communicated to FDR in a memo that FDR signed immediately. Undesirables are coming into the country and we have to close immigration. And that made it very difficult for those in Europe who had visas.
The flow of refugees almost was zero until about 1944, when 1,000 people from a refugee camp in Italy came to upstate New York.
The lessons remain the same as they do today. What is the role of government in rescuing refugees? What should the U.S. do? A few individuals taking risk can change history.
We could have saved hundreds of thousands of people, and we didn't. They wound up in the clutches of the Nazis and withered away. Here was a missed opportunity. Sure, 80 people were saved, but what about the next 200,000 or million? We had the capacity and the ability to save them, and we didn't.
We survived, so that's fine. 6 million did not survive, and that is the catastrophe.
May I just say one word? You know the meaning of Shoah, which is the way in Israel they refer to the Holocaust? Catastrophe, right? And this was a catastrophe beyond any parallel that we know from history or now. But, Rebecca, did I cut you off? I'm sorry.
No, you did not.
I just couldn't. And Laura, did I cut you off?
Not at all. I thought that was a beautiful point you make. To that point, I want to say something. I haven't looked at a lot of the chat, but I saw when someone said, "Oh, let's talk about the film." I'm going to talk about the film for a second. This is kind of an interesting thing. I mean, that clip is I get very emotional when I watch that last clip.
Right.
But there was this one point, I'm going to share this creative thing with you guys, and I didn't even mean to do it during the edit, and then it happened, and I'm like, it blew me away, like how, I don't want to get emotional, but the kids, they go like this, the little kids, if you can watch it again tonight or tomorrow morning, like the kids go like this to look at the arms tattoos, and then, I'm going to cry, and then they go like this, like that, and then you see the Hitler, and then you see Hitler. It's just, you're right, Joan. It was like no other horrible, time. And my goal is to get people emotional like this, like I'm getting. So, I want, kids to watch this. I want teenagers to watch this. I mean, Stephen says a few individuals taking risks can change history, right?
Okay. Yeah. So I also would like to say, Olivia, who is the creator of all these fabulous programs, has something up in the pipeline, and it may or may not show up, but it didn't start with Hitler. It started with the Spanish Civil War, right, Mariana? It started before. It wasn't not only Hitler. So a film like yours maybe can stop things, nip them in the bud from happening again. That's what I get from your film. Okay. And now I need to talk about our upcoming programs. So after today, you're going to get an email about our upcoming programs. But I just want to tell you that next week we have the Bulgarian Miracle. About 800 people already signed up for that show. So hurry up. There's a limited capacity. If you want to be a part of that Bulgarian Miracle program, it's free, and hurry up and sign up. After that, the week after, we have a fabulous, fabulous film called Dear Freddie. I've seen the whole film. It's unbelievable. It's the story of Freddie Hirsch, a sports teacher and a counselor, a part of the Maccabi youth movement in Hashomer HaTzair. My father was a part of Hashomer HaTzair. And their slogan is Chazak ve'ematz, which means be strong and brave. Watch this clip about Freddie and tell me what you think.
When we were in Auschwitz, Freddie always made us feel like princes and princesses and king and queens.
פרד היה אל רומאי. אנשים השתגעו אחריו. הוא היה נחמד, הוא ידע לדבר עם מנגלה.
היה בנוי יפה, איש יפה, חייכן, אהב ילדים.
ידענו שבחורות רצות אחריו, וזה לא הלך.
His friends made him meet two the most beautiful, very sexy girls in Terezin. Just, looking, will he fall for this one or the other one, or is it hopeless? He couldn't fall in love. That was the gossip of the ghetto.
film is about Freddie and how he protected the children in Terezin and in Auschwitz. It's a fantastic film. And that film will ask for an $18 donation. High, double high, triple high, whatever high you like, very happy to receive. But the Sousa Mendes Foundation wants everybody to be able to view these films. So any donation that you choose, will be very happy to make you a part of the program. And set your alarms for 2 p.m. and we're going to change the clock. So be very careful because the presenters are in Israel. So it's 2 p.m. in the US, which also will have a change of clocks. Don't miss it. Okay. Now we're going to have some Q&A. The problem here is that I'm not really great at Q&A. This is my very first time, and I'm going to do my very best to get all the questions in, okay? So here we go. In the beginning, somebody said, you know, please be aware that you must see the film, Laura's film, Nobody Wants Us, until the very end, because she has a lot of input from students at the very end, which is very, very interesting. So I caution you to, if you've seen it, okay, maybe you're allowed to go back and see it again, but if you haven't, please watch it to the very, very end. And another person spoke about the America First gathering and how jarring it was. Maybe Blanche wants to say something about maybe Eleanor Roosevelt's reaction to the America First movement. What do you think, Blanche?
I'm not sure what the question is. It was an isolationist movement, you know,
Yeah.
just that Europe can perish. Churchill's crusade, let the Nazis and the communists kill each other, and the US will just stay on the sidelines. But Eleanor Roosevelt was opposed to that. We had to save democracy, or at least fight for democracy, which was, from Eleanor Roosevelt's point of view, you know, you start with that segregation. When the refugees get here and they're so shocked that the US is so segregated. Well, Hitler thought US segregation was a model and used that separate park benches that he learned. You know, we'll have no Jews allowed here and here and here. I mean, segregation inspired that kind of creepy behavior. So, you know, as Wendell Willkie said, and Eleanor Roosevelt quoted, everything that happens anywhere ultimately affects everybody, everywhere. And that was her reaction to America First.
Absolutely. What about Breckinridge Long? Did she try to get rid of him?
Oh, absolutely.
That's one of the questions.
She was horrified when FDR put him in charge of everything. And it wasn't until Henry Morgenthau's announcement of complicity in 1944 that FDR created the War Refugee Board and really did, you know, remove Breckinridge Long from power. But it was incredible. And Eleanor Roosevelt was appalled. She was, you know, she spoke against him, she wrote against him, and she was horrified that FDR kept promoting him. I mean, they went to Groton and Harvard together. They were old pals. It's really a disgusting story.
Oh, can I make one quick comment? I found this, Breckinridge Long has a war diary. It's really, really good. I mean, you know, it's long, but if you want to find out his exact feelings on this incident, I read through it. The words in the film where we had the actors say what he said were literal words from his war diary.
It's really, you use it very well. And he's just he's a fascist, you know, we've had lots of fascists in our history, including our former president. And there he is.
The chat is actually is jarring to me, to be quite honest, that there's such pushback against the parallels of history, because as Blanche just said, our last president was a fascist. And, you know, prior to that, going into, at the beginning of his administration, having worked with asylum seekers from around the world for the last 20 years, you know, I had one client come in and he rolled up his pants and he showed me the burns on his legs where he had been dropped into vats of oil that his government had put him in there. But I know 100% that that government did not start off dropping the people in vats of oil. They started off by finding a scapegoat, by dehumanizing them, by making them the other, and by presenting themselves as the person who alone could save the rest of us from these horrible vermin. And that is 100% an authoritarian's handbook. And they do that. I've studied authoritarian governments all around the world, and that's what they do. And, you know, to not recognize that that was happening in the United States turns a blind eye to what lessons we can learn from history. And I think that clearly we are now, not clearly, but we have moved beyond that administration, and the role that we need to play now is to hold them accountable. I took great comfort in, you know, there was a former German Nazi guard who was recently deported. You know, I think he's 70, 90, very elderly man, but justice needs to continue to be served, because if that doesn't happen, then there's going to be impunity to continue on with this.
Absolutely. I mean, and separation of families, you know, it's so like the 1940s.
Right.
And there are still 600 children and their parents and they have not been reconnected. And there are 200 children who, you know, they don't know where their parents are. And this is amazing. So we really have to be vigilant and active and angry and activist, hearts open, fists high. Yes, thank you, Rebecca, for your work. It's just fabulous.
Thank you.
Rebecca, I'm astonished about what you said about the leader of which country is taking his adversaries, or what he considers adversaries, and putting them and burning them in oil. What country is it? And what does he have against these people? What is it, you know, what motivates such behavior?
Well, I can't, it was an African country. I think it might've been Congo, the Democratic Republic of Congo. But it's happening.
Oh, you're not talking about South America and now.
No, well, in that specific, no, this was an asylum client probably about 10 years ago. But you know, it's happening now. I met Nicaraguans who, you know, you can't walk past the government and express, you can't walk past a government official and express your opinion. I have Cubans, Cuban asylum seekers, there's a lot of them right now, who are completely prohibited from expressing any sort of opposition to the government. And it takes the place, you know, Guatemala in the 80s, there were, taking people and killing them in mass graves. We had, was it Pinochet in Chile was taking flights of people and throwing them off of planes. You know, there are countless examples of authoritarian governments who treat their dissenters very harshly. You know, we're lucky in that sense that the dissenters in the US aren't treated as harshly, but my colleagues on the border who have been working, US citizens who have been working for refugees on the border have lost their global entry passes. One woman was detained with her family, she was detained for several hours just for crossing the border, just trying to do her work. So the US government has also been doing these, you know, not clearly, I'm not saying at all it's as bad, but there are, you know, there's lists of undesirables, and the US government has done that for decades.
Okay, yeah, it's a big subject, but may I ask a question of Laura?
Sure.
Laura, I understand that you live near the Chesapeake Bay, and that that came right up, you know, in your backyard, let's say, to make that film. But where did you first hear about this story? Tell us. People want to know in the chat. People say, let's talk about the film. So they want to know more about how, I want to know how you even heard about this story. And
sure, I'd be happy to talk about that. So this was a story. I grew up in Newport News, Virginia, and two of the heroes in the film, Jacob L. Morewitz and his wife, Sallie Rome Morewitz, happened to be my great uncle and aunt from Newport.
I don't believe it. Really?
Believe it. Yeah, that's right. And I never knew them. And I never knew of this amazing incident in history until their grandson came to me telling me about the story. And they were, he told me about the story, and he said he wanted to make a film about it. And I thought it was a great idea. And his grandson is a forensic scientist now in California. And he is now like the steamship Quanza expert, along with his uncle, who was one of their children, David Morewitz, who was instrumental in helping me get this film funded. And I ended up going around the country interviewing the very few remaining survivors who could actually tell the story. And it sat for a few years because we didn't really have a lot of funds. Flash forward to around 2019. And then we really wanted to get this film done. We were doing some modern day parallels we ended up focusing on the history, which I feel like that was a good way to go. And now Morewitzes somebody was asking about where are some of the Morewitzes now. We're all scattered around the country. There are a few voyeurs serving the underserved in our family, and a lot of social workers. But
can I talk about Kathy Rand? You know, I know Kathy Rand personally because we were on one of the journeys on the road to freedom. Her father was extremely important in this story. Sousa Mendes visa recipient, and there were how many Sousa Mendes visa recipients on the ship?
Yeah, I don't know the exact amount of Sousa Mendes visa recipients, but there were about 86 refugees, and many of them were Sousa Mendes visa recipients. And Kathy Rand's father, as you've seen in the film, was the one who reached out. It was a very circuitous, route of, he reached out to somebody in New York, who reached out to somebody in Virginia, who reached out to the Morewitzes, and the husband-wife maritime law team. So, I mean, that's something else that I think is a really cool takeaway of the film, is that you can be a maritime lawyer and you can save refugees. You can do so. You don't necessarily have to be an immigration attorney. You can be a member of the National Council of Jewish Women and help save people. Did that answer? So Kathy Rand's father was then, he ended up hiring Jacob Morewitz to help him. And I think it was 4 people, but he was hired to help 4. And this is also something that is a beautiful takeaway. Hired to help 4, but he saved almost 90 people.
So let's just say surviving the Shoah, the calamity, took many, many miracles, because that ship would have been sent back to Europe if it wasn't for Rand, if it wasn't for Morewitz, if it wasn't for Roosevelt, if it wasn't for and then in the end, the help of the Jewish Council of Women. So it's
Sousa Mendes, right? Sousa Mendes was an amazing.
Well, that was the first miracle. That was the first miracle. It's time for our concluding thoughts. So I think we decided how we're going to do that. Laura, please.
Sure. I mean, I can go first, and then Rebecca and Blanche, a couple closing.
Very good.
I know we only have 5 minutes. So I just want to share with you all that I'm really excited to let you all know that we have created, Seltzer Film and Video, my company, has created a four-part educational program. And you can learn more about it at nobodywantsus.com, but it's the 44-minute film. It's 14 educational modules that have been vetted by subject matter experts and teachers, and they're starting to get distributed to schools throughout the country. Very excited about that. And I'm starting to get a lot of feedback from teachers now, which I welcome. And these kinds of dialogues, we're helping cultivate these dialogues with students. And super cool, we're creating a virtual reality exhibit. And the quick is you can literally, kids are going to be able, you can literally do it on your iPhone now. We're figuring it out so it's very accessible. You don't have to have VR goggles. A kid can literally step on the ship and talk to Malvina, like one of the refugees.
Whoa. Wow. There was a question about the captain, but we really don't have time now.
Well, feel free to write me if somebody wants to write me or something.
Nobodywantsus.com. Everybody can send their questions, the things that I didn't get to, straight to Laura. And now, Rebecca, would you have some concluding thoughts you'd like to share?
I do. I've seen comments about how to help. And I think that the best takeaway that we can do after watching this film is to act today. And there are groups on the border who are helping. There are people in need. Though just a few off the top of my head that I personally have worked with, there people in transit. There are continuing to be migrants, asylum seekers who go to the border, and people who have gotten to the border and can't, and they come back. There's a shelter in Celaya, Mexico, that has remained open during the pandemic, called Albergue ABA. You can make a donation to them through the Latin American Relief Fund at latinamericanrelieffund.org. There is the group of lawyers, now the people who have been able to get into the country, because just like the people on the ship, the disembarking was the beginning of the next path. So these people now have to go through their legal process to get asylum, and they are in need of lawyers, and Lawyers for Good Government, L4GG.org, is providing legal assistance to them. And the Sidewalk School is helping people get to where they need to go. So any of those organizations, I think that Matt might have put those in the chat. The links are available, and there's just so much to do, and all I can say is please do something, because your help is needed. And everybody here who now knows about what happened to individual people on the ships, you have the power to do something and to make a huge difference to somebody's life. So thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. Blanche.
I was muted. I really just want to second what Rebecca said and what Laura has meant for us to think about, which is how we can be activists. Every one of us needs to be activists to deal with the atrocities going on. Not only, think about how we have to end the prison industrial complex, how we have to end the military industrial complex, how we finally have to deal with the fact that there are people in the United States, the richest country in the world, starving to death. There are so many things that Eleanor Roosevelt, I think, would be horrified if she were here today. Housing for all, healthcare for all. What happened to single payer? It was supposed to be in the 1935 Social Security Act, and the AMA lobbied it to death. Eisenhower wanted it in the 1958 medical care bill, and the AMA lobbied it again. And even in the Obamacare program, we don't have single payer. So we don't have health care for all. And we can see in this pandemic, the hundreds of thousands of people dying because they cannot get food, clothing, health, housing, healthcare. Who are we and what do we stand for? These are urgent questions we all have to deal with. And I am so grateful to you, Laura, and to Rebecca, and to you, Joan, because you're putting it all together, and activism will save us. Thank you.
Blanche? Well, there's nothing left to say, except thank you everyone for being here today. Come back next week and come back the week after. And there'll be a little break. And then Olivia has a million different fabulous programs for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joan.